Nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Okay. It's suddenly turned cold outside.
Yeah.
Have you been in informatics before?
Yeah.
It's a strange environment, isn't it?
Great.
He's a behavioural psychologist.
formality, but we have to. Yeah.
For a meeting. This evening we have Angus Bancroft from Edinburgh University, who's come all the way here from the other side of town. He is a sociologist, which makes a pleasant change for us, who specialises in illicit drug use and crypto businesses. So, Angus, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thank you. Should I put them slides? No, I don't. Yeah, that's good. Should I put the microphone on? No, that's fine. Awesome. All right, well, thanks very much to the BCS and Paul for inviting me here today. This is something of the development of a talk I gave in the Fringe as part of the Cabaret of Dangerous Ideas in August. So if it appears to be full of appalling one-liners and lame jokes, then that's entirely down to me and the context in which it was produced. So I research people who buy and sell drugs online using crypto markets, which imply the Darknet, and I also look at the kind of organisations and technologies that are involved in cybercriminal activity. So I interview people who are engaged in these systems, and also look at the kind of discussions they have online. And can I start with a question? How many of you use Tor? Use Tor browser? If you don't have to say what for, because for anything, probably legitimate purposes. Thank you very much. So explain a little bit more about what Tor is. Obviously, many of you will know already. So the question that I asked today is, are Darknet businesses really businesses? And I want to talk a little bit about the models, business models that cybercriminals use and develop, how they make judgments about economic value and risk. And the question I'm really examining in my work is how do criminals solve problems? How do they come up with solutions? How do they identify problems and come up with solutions to them? And the answer is by a certain combination of a technical and social infrastructure that need to be made to work together effectively so they can pull off whatever criminal operation they might want to do, whether it's a drug trade, whether it's buying and selling malware, whether it's carding, or many of the other activities that they engage in. I'm quite interested in how cybercrime is identified and discussed in our society as well, because I think that's very important in what we understand by cybercrime and the kind of harms that might involve and how we can increase our security and protect ourselves against them. Particularly interested in how far back the history of cybercrime goes and how tricky it's been actually to identify whether some activities are in fact criminal or not. And the first cybercrime in the sense of a manipulation of an electronic communication system for personal gain occurred in around about 1836 when the telegraph system was effectively hacked. The French telegraph system was manipulated by a couple of gentlemen who wanted to manipulate information about the Paris Stock Exchange so they could get ahead of the curve and make some money out of it. What was interesting then was, although this fraud became known, it wasn't criminal. There wasn't anything illegal about what they're doing. And in response, the French government nationalised the telegraph system. So the response was that the control of information should be entirely within the purview of the government, and that was the way to stop this happening. So throughout history, we've had difficulties and challenges knowing when crime has taken place. What category do we put it under? You know, is it a cybercrime? Is it another type of crime? Because increasingly many crimes involve an online element. And we've also had trouble separating and parsing cybercriminal activities from other activities that are sailing rather close to the wind. For example, increasingly crime takes place using the open web, using illicit financial systems where the risk models that are meant to govern them are ignored, regulations are undercut or simply got around by the activities of those organisations involved in that. For example, HSBC, the bank, was a few years ago identified by the United States Senate as being involved laundering a rather large amount of money for the Mexican drug cartels. So they're providing a service for the cartels by helping them transport money across the US-Mexican border. And the sums involved were actually so large they had to, I think they had to refurbish their Mexican branch and open a new branch in the Cayman Islands to facilitate this activity. So they're very keen to support this activity. And what they did was they ignored some of the fairly obvious risk signals that were involved in large people turning up with large suitcases of cash that they wanted them to deal with, which is generally a fairly clear sign that something untoward might be happening. So increasingly, with cybercrime, what we're having is enmeshed licit and illicit activities and licit and illicit infrastructures. And that's why, although I'm talking about the Darknet, one thing that I think is very important is that the Darknet isn't a singular place. It's not a sort of underbelly of the internet or anything like that. And most crime is happening out with that. So although a lot of discussion has focused on the Darknet, partly because it's really interesting and it's very innovative and it's quite easy to access, I don't think we should be confined by that, and I don't think we should stigmatize the Darknet either. In fact, just the opposite is what I'm going to argue. Increasingly as well, governments are involved in maintaining cybercriminal capacity. So whereas in the 1990s, about maybe what the majority of hacking activity was done by private individuals, increasingly hacking, ransomware, other kinds of activities that we might think of as quite harmful are being done by various governments, and they're being maintained. Sometimes governments maintain an arm's length capacity that they can use to disrupt the networks of rival states. So it's become increasingly hard to separate these activities out and to point to something saying, this is cybercriminal and this should be ended. That doesn't stop governments, politicians doing that, of course, and trying to identify technologies which they can stigmatize or restrict or weaken. For example, we had the Home Secretary recently arguing again that encryption should be effectively weakened, so because the usual reason that it's used by terrorists. And I think she said she doesn't need to understand how encryption works in order to know that it can be got right. She doesn't want to weaken it, she just wants a backdoor in it, which of course is weakening the whole thing. So there's a basic failure of understanding about what some of these technologies are and what the benefits might be. And also because we start blanket criminalizing particular activities and technologies without thinking about harm, ethics, intent, and security, and how some attempts to supposedly enhance security by, for example, banning certain kinds of encryption, actually make everyone's security worse. So to some extent, certain kinds of security are indivisible. You can't really reduce encryption for ISIS, for example, without reducing it for everyone. And for that reason, you can learn a lot from people who are very interested in cybersecurity, and some of those are cyber criminals. So we can learn a great deal from them. I think we also need to understand the extent to which behaviours that are criminalised are part of a context of where people are encouraged to engage in activity which is then problematised or criminalised. For example, people have been jailed for sending tweets, joking tweets they thought were among friends, turned out to be very much not among friends, from sharing unpopular opinions on Facebook or on Twitter or on other media. In one case, for a person got his dog to do a Nazi salute on YouTube, for which he was investigated by the police. So things that might have been considered harmless or really not important are leading to either social shaming, public shaming, or criminalisation. And I think that's a bit harsh because the attention economy, which demands that people who are using social media upload information about themselves, upload videos, upload photos, is kind of encouraging this. And yet we're also, at the same time, anathematizing, criminalizing people for doing what is demanded by the underlying logic of many social media platforms. So I think, again, we have to think about this as well in the context of why the Darknet might be a really useful and productive system. So I'm also concerned about the ethics of this because many of these questions are being decided for us. So many questions about what privacy means and the rights we have to control information about ourselves and to control what's done with our own data are really being just given up without a fight. They're being given up to major platforms, to governments, for example, who can now tell a huge amount about us from our data trail. They can analyse an enormous amount about our likes, about our situation, about things that we might consider very personal, our sexuality, our personal habits, and so on. And of course, this is generating risks for people. Were that information to be compromised, which it can be. The Ashley Madison hack showed that and exposed many people to phishing attacks and to exploitation because they'd used Ashley Madison to set up affairs, or so they hoped. Anyway, it turned out that Ashley Madison, a large number of the female users of Ashley Madison were actually bots created by the company, so a lot of people were in love with the piece of code. Coding is great, but it's not that great. So these kind of vulnerabilities, I'm very interested in how they're generated within the systems that we use, and the kinds of demands placed on people. If to get a job you have to have a LinkedIn profile, that again demands particular performance from you. It demands that you perform as a particular, or present as a particular kind of person, that you share information which is then validated by other users of that platform. So there are clear benefits to these platforms, obviously, but I think there are also threats to who we are, how we're being defined as individuals, the extent to which we can really define our own selves and present our own selves in a sort of more authentic way. So very interesting kind of broad changes in society that are being driven by some of these platforms. And that's part of the reason why I was interested in the Darknet. I've been researching drug use and the drug trade for a few years now. And several years ago, I was chatting to some of my students in class about the process of the whole drug economy, the process of buying illicit drugs, and one of my students said, "Have you heard about this place called the Silk Road?" And that was entirely new to me. The Silk Road was an innovative site on the Tor network, which was used to buy and sell illicit drugs, and it was closed down after a year or so of operation, and was rapidly replaced by sites that mimicked it. This was an economy that very much generated its own demand, and the way these crypto markets work is that a vendor, they're effectively an open platform for vendors to sign up and offer all kinds of illicit drugs, occasionally other products like malware, hacked Netflix accounts, other kinds of hacked accounts, credit card numbers, and so on. But definitely the main driver of it is illicit drugs. And vendors will go on and advertise whatever they're selling. So that might be cannabis, might be methamphetamine, might be ecstasy, LSD, and so on. So they'll advertise a drug. They'll say where they're willing to ship it to, the terms of which are willing to ship it, whether it's, for example, for next day delivery, other kinds of perks. Maybe they'll throw in free samples because they're, people running these businesses are very savvy, very good at building up reputations. So they'll often go on a new crypto market and set up with some free samples for people to try. They'll target reliable reviewers on these sites who are trusted by other users and can be trusted to post a positive review about their product, which other people will take notice of. So product reviews are very important in establishing somebody as a reasonably reliable vendor. The person buying the drugs will, after purchasing it, they'll receive it in the post. If they're smart, they won't have sent it to their own address, but will have sent it to someone else's. Again, ideal operational security and actual practice are very different, as I found from interviewing some people who use this. One of the advantages of being a student in Edinburgh is that you've got, if you live in a flat, there's always mail arriving for other people, people who used to live there. So unfortunately, those people's names get used a lot for people buying on the crypto markets, because you know that will be delivered to your address. So if ever you're living in an Edinburgh flat, you move out and there's students moving in, it's a really good idea to make sure the post office forwards your mail. They don't just deliver it to that place, otherwise you may find your name being used for a drop address for the Darknet. So they're very much sites that promote an idea of drug trade as being rational, being market-driven, being contract-based exchanges between individuals. And the advantages of using the Darknet for the drug users that I speak to are partly that. It avoids violence. So it avoids the kind of violence that they've experienced or they're at risk of on the street market, the face-to-face market. They can make much better evaluations of quality of the drugs they're buying. There's a much greater choice. They can predict much better about the qualities of the drug they're going to be using. So they can plan much better what's going to happen. They can assess the risks involved much more effectively. So they'll look at other reviews people have posted and trip reports people post, saying what the expected effects are. And of course, each drug is actually different for each individual, but they can calibrate their dose much better. So they see it's a very important way of reducing risk from illicit drugs. So although it seemed often as a kind of purely pragmatic activity, since it's presumably a bit less risky to obtain drugs this way, for the users they often see it in a more kind of moral activity, one that allows them to reduce the harms from illicit drugs and to provide support to other users as well. So this is a quality that isn't immediately apparent, but people purchasing drugs in the Darknet can support each other by reviewing vendors, by sharing the expected effects, by discussing ways to combine drugs in ways that are more effective, or maybe deal with some of the harmful side effects of particular drugs. So they might talk about, this brand of heroin is particularly good for using on the weekend if you're partying, but this opioid is much better if you're wanting to go to work and you need to deal with withdrawal symptoms through the day, or you need to focus at work. So something else I found was that there was a huge diversity of people using these markets, and initially I expected, it's going to generally be middle class, fairly well educated, affluent people who are able to take advantage of the Tor network. And although that's true for many, There's actually a much greater range of people there who are using it, and for example, there are people who are quite heavily addicted, who've been using particular drugs for a long time, and saw this using the crypto markets as a kind of way out of some of the kind of binds they were in from being involved in the drug market for a long time. So as a way of avoiding avoiding drug market violence and establishing a kind of model of illicit but more controlled and governed exchange of drugs. So many of them saw themselves as having an ethical commitment to the markets they're involved in. And sometimes this could extend to, for example, using them for social supply. Now that's a phenomenon in the illicit drug market, whereby instead of individuals just buying whatever drugs they might want, so they'll come together and one person will buy for the group, and sometimes it can be to make a small profit, or sometimes it can simply be as a service to their friends. And they'll do this partly to increase their buying power, but also to make use of the knowledge they have about the drug market. So instead of everyone having to be involved in the drug market, one person will take on the role of providing drugs for their friendship group. And this kind of activity extended to the crypto markets. And what often would happen is, particularly people in more disadvantaged circumstances would pool the buying power of many friends, so they could obtain drugs for them. So it might be planning a party, for example. They ensure a good supply of drugs for everyone. And again, they saw this as a way of using their digital skills, so their knowledge about the Darknet and about using Tor, they would use that in order to ensure their friends had a good time. So they saw it as a kind of not just a practical but also a social commitment to their friends. And one of the interesting things about that was how self-taught many users were as well. So some were already highly knowledgeable. Some had computer science degrees and were able to use that knowledge, but many were self-taught. They'd heard about this on online forums, on Reddit and so on, and they again saw this as a way of developing some of their digital skills and improving them. And they saw the kind of interactions that there were in the crypto markets as in a similar way, as being much more professional, much more respectful. And that was quite important for people who'd often been stigmatized because of their drug use. So people who used heroin, particularly meth, as well, other relatively stigmatized drugs, who were often at the bottom of the hierarchy of drug users. They're often treated rather poorly by dealers, found that they could actually engage in respectful communication using the crypto markets. So it was beneficial for them on a personal basis. And they could use different kinds of knowledge and pool them as well, and share these different kinds of knowledge about what drugs were going to be good, how to make different drugs. And one, for example, some individuals who were chemistry graduates were able to use drug quality tests, which are employed usually to catch people out and see if a particular substance is an illicit drug. So they're able to use these and post the results online. So yes, this person's making a claim about the purity of what they're selling, and it's right. So again, they saw this as a part of the whole knowledge cycle around the crypto markets. So there were these emerging social communities around these markets, and although I don't want to give a too starry-eyed view of this, it's certainly the case that the attraction wasn't simply the fact that illicit drugs were easily available. Say a little bit more about the infrastructure involved. They used mainly Bitcoin for drug trades, and again that's a barrier because it takes a little bit of technical nous to use Bitcoin in a way that is more anonymous, because I'm sure you're all very well aware the blockchain the Bitcoin blockchain is a public document, it's getting increasingly easy to tie different kinds of transactions together that are happening in the blockchain and know, if not who's behind them, at least see what market they're associated with. And to avoid that, you have to do things like launder your Bitcoin, or you have to use what's called local Bitcoin by paying cash for somebody to transfer Bitcoin to you face to face. But that requires quite a lot of extensive knowledge. And again, it's really significant how people were willing to trade security for convenience in that. And many people simply didn't do that. They knew they probably should, but really they thought, well, if I'm not buying a vast amount, I'm not buying kilos of cocaine, I'll take the risk because I really can't be bothered with all this faff around making myself more secret. So those people who thought themselves as sort of drug lord level would take a lot of pleasure in making themselves fully anonymous, using a burner computer, a laptop they could throw away that was running Tails, the anonymous live system, and taking all the kind of precautions. And partly that was gave them a sense of satisfaction in itself, of having kind of control over what was known about them online. So that's really some of the benefits for those involved and what attracted them to the crypto markets. As you may be aware, there's been a lot of success by law enforcement recently against some of the major crypto markets. So recently, two of the major crypto markets were one called Alphabay and one called Hansa. And Alphabay was a very technologically quite well-developed, well-designed crypto market. It looked quite professional. And some months ago, Alphabay went offline, and it was assumed that this was due to what's called an exit scam. So these markets are all quite vulnerable to the administrators deciding to shut the market and run off with everybody's Bitcoin. And this has been the end of many a crypto market. Simply, it's too tempting. The amounts going through these crypto markets are quite significant. They're on order of tens of millions of pounds monthly. And although this is a small proportion of the overall illicit drug market, it's not more than maybe around 6%, I estimate. So most drug deals are face to face. Although it's a small proportion, for a small group of people, that's a huge amount of cash. That's very tempting. It's very tempting to put your hand in the till, especially when none of the other people involved really know who you are. And therefore there can be no comeback personally if you close your crypto market at the right moment. So these kinds of scams were a constant threat to people. And vendors could do the same thing, offer a huge number of orders and then just disappear without fulfilling them because as they thought the risk to them was fairly low by doing that. So it was assumed when Alphabay went offline unexpectedly and with no warning, this was what had happened. So they had been on the receiving end of an exit scam. So at the time, people on the discussion forums were a bit annoyed about that, but they were also, that's kind of expected risk. We can handle that. Let's all move to the second largest market, which is one called Hansa. So that's fine. All the vendors can just move their accounts there. And Hansa had set up a welcome page saying, if you've been affected by Alphabay takedown, come and sign up with us, and we'll import your reputation score. We'll just import your whole setup. It'd be very easy for you. So people are like, that's awesome. We'll do that. It turned out that Alphabay had been taken offline by the FBI, and Hansa had been taken over by the Dutch police for about a month and had been run by them. So they were harvesting everyone's data when they ran in from Alphabay. And they could link, of course, people were saying, yeah, this guy, who's on Alphabay. Great! We can link you together to the records we have. So they're spending their whole time scraping data and targets, identifying people. And I thought that was quite a major event, which has now spooked a lot of people. They're kind of moving away from the crypto markets now and looking at other ways of dealing drugs. So it's quite shaken up the market quite significantly, which has not settled down yet. And I thought what was interesting was some of the technical issues that happened that caused Alphabet to be taken down, which seemed to be, according to the indictment of the administrator, who sadly committed suicide in jail, was some very basic failures of operational security by him. So it appears to be that he used his own Hotmail address in welcome emails to keep vendors signing up, and had a very easily linked ClearNet online profile in a forum, the Rich Fee forum by a pickup artist, so quite a sort of misogynistic individual. So he boasted there rather a lot about the kind of cars he owned and so on. So probably some basic failures happening there. And one of the challenges that the Dutch police found was actually the practicalities of running a crypto market, because they found that one of the things they had to do was mod disputes between people, which they found quite tedious. So people would complain, they'd have to suddenly be in this customer service role for illegal activities. So that was a bit of a drag on them. So they're probably glad when they could finally shut the whole thing down and be shot of it. What I'm interested to hear that this was a major success for law enforcement in its own terms. But I'm kind of interested in looking a bit more widely than that in terms of what we might consider the overall ethics of these criminal operations, because what can happen in these situations is that a takedown of a market can create opportunities for more predatory kinds of crime to be engaged in. So one of the things that happens is, since one crypto market is taken off, people set up fake crypto markets so they can scam people. And what happens is often people rush to the darknets and to hear about these because they think, oh, this sounds interesting. You get drugs like this. So it creates interest and it creates, I think, in some ways more kind of predatory kinds of crime. So you move from quite stable communities which have a potential for harm reduction to ones which are more unstable and less secure. So I think I think there is an issue there that high-profile takedowns might not necessarily overall increase or decrease harm. You might even have the perverse effect of increasing it. So I think these questions have to be approached quite carefully. So what we do know from that as well is that increasingly crime or cybercrime is becoming more localized, and in response to repeated takedowns of the crypto markets by law enforcement, increasingly people are looking to combine online ways of purchasing drugs with face-to-face ways. So a lot of people use Gumtree, for example. They use Reddit. They use other kinds of ClearNet forums, which of course don't offer the same kind of security, but do offer a certain amount of anonymity due to just crowd effects, due to the fact that there are so many other activities happening on these sites. There isn't a single place for law enforcement to look. So people are moving in different ways in response to that. So both drug dealers and drug users do have very, quite developed risk models that change quite quickly in response to law enforcement activities and scams from other criminals. So what's happening is Law enforcement activities then have the effect of kind of slowly perfecting market. They act as a kind of evolutionary force upon it. So people are moving also away from Bitcoin to Monero and investigating new kinds of cryptocurrency that they can use, which will, they hope anyway, provide new kinds of anonymity. So as I say, increasingly crime is although this image of cybercrime is very global, under these pressures it's becoming much more localized. You know, it's much easier to send drugs through the post in the country you're in rather than sending it across borders. So it makes much more sense now to avoid that risk. It makes much more sense to try and control much more of the supply chain, you know, if you're a drug vendor, because that way you can control the risks throughout it. So these changes in the kind of business models people are using are happening in response to these kind of pressures, and they're happening quite rapidly. What I also find is looking at the kind of networks that users of crypto markets are involved in. Increasingly, they are turning to flatter, non-hierarchical forms of organisation, which is also one of the attractions of the crypto markets for them. And again, we often deal with images of drug dealers as very shady characters, and larger scale drug dealers as kind of Mr. Biggs controlling this kind of cartel. People usually involving speedboats and women in bikinis and so on. At least that's my image of what being a drug dealer should involve. So it's also a very Miami Vice kind of sense of what these activities are. In fact, criminal networks like that are hierarchical, highly brittle, highly vulnerable to being taken down, and also the people at the top of them don't seem to be able to control their need for publicity. And so they're very easy, very vulnerable to law enforcement, to police turning an underling or otherwise penetrating the organisation. The organisation is highly vulnerable to law enforcement activity. And that's why increasingly these crypto markets involve flat and highly adaptive networks which have much more resilience and where there isn't a single node that can be compromised to take down the entire operation. What I find as well that's very interesting about this is they're quite a complex social organisation to them, and the most important people in them are not people at the centre of these networks who maybe have lots of ties to other people in terms of people they're buying drugs from, people they're selling to, and so on. The really important people are actually those with what are called weak ties. They've got many acquaintanceships, many ties to different sets of networks. And they're the crucial people to transmit information and knowledge about both specific activities and also about how to use the technology as well, and how to run the organisation. So these kind of lower level, you might think lower level individuals are kind of the key ones in this hierarchy. So this is why it's a good idea for drug dealers not to have many close friends, but to have acquaintances. I think, returning to my theme as well about what we can learn from the Darknet. I think we see partly how, although there are rational incentives to be involved in drug dealing using the crypto markets, there are also perfectly good reasons not to. Perfectly good reasons to stick with the street market and with people you know, people you vetted. And also that involvement is more than just about obtaining drugs. It's quite status driven. It's about the emotions involved. It's about people seeking respect in a way. And many of the incentives for security that are used by people who are involved, I think can be shared much more widely. For example, anonymity technology, as Sarah Jamie Lewis said today in the seminar this morning. Anonymity technology is very, very useful for all sorts of people. It's not just useful for people who are engaged in illicit activities. I think it's very important that it's not seen and badged in that way. We should see a much bigger use case for anonymizing tech and for tech that isn't effectively designed to share information about us, and that can be protective. It can protect us from surveillance. It can protect us socially, and it can also protect us from criminal activity too. So to return to my initial question then, so how do criminals solve problems? Well, increasingly they use non-standard, adaptive, risk-diffusing and non-hierarchical qualities of networks. And although the darknet crypto markets do receive a lot of publicity and attention, because they're kind of exciting and really quite novel, they're actually quite hostile to most criminals. Most criminals don't want to use the darknet because it's far too public. So for example, there's been a lot of scares about people using them for gun running, for sex trafficking, for other kinds of activities like that. But actually, those people who are sex traffickers don't use the darknet generally because partly, sometimes they lack the technical skill, and also they don't need to because they have much better offline distribution systems, and it's not any good for what they want to do. They can't form the kind of anonymous trust networks that support crypto market activity. So I think these ethical questions aren't easily solved just by technical solutions, but increasingly I think we can learn a lot from the kind of shared ideas of security and mutual support that are used in illicit crypto markets. Okay, thank you very much. That's all
We've got some time for some questions. For me to think that people review drugs, so I'm not going to look at TripAdvisor and say why do you do. At the front.
You spoke a lot about risk models, about the risk models of various parties. Humans are notoriously bad at assessing risk. Are there extra difficulties in cyber networks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important point, because I think that's a lot of the people involved do rely on kind of myths about what the risks might be, particularly the risks of law enforcement intersection. So there's a lot of what I call theatre of security happening around this. For example, using particular kinds of packaging that's supposedly impenetrably stealthy, so it won't be detected by drug sniffers, and I think using certain kinds of Bitcoin tumbling, thinking that is totally safe, when in fact often Bitcoin tumbling is quite open and it's quite traceable by law enforcement. So there's a lot of kind of using these things of a kind of symbolic security involved. So myths spread very quickly about what's risky and what isn't, and often it's notable on the Reddit discussion forums after the closure of Alphabet, that a lot of the discussion was about failures of the individual rather than vulnerabilities in the technology. So a lot of it was, this guy was an idiot and he spent more time hiding his mistress from his wife than hiding his criminal operation from the FBI, which might be quite logical, I don't know. And pointing to the individual failures of their own operational security rather than vulnerabilities in the technology they're using. And I thought it was interesting. Again, this is something that the Darknet researcher Sarah Jamie Lewis said this morning. Is that people have now moved on to using discussion forums. So quite simple, very basic kind of text-based discussion forums. Sometimes in the Darknet, sometimes out with it. To exchange drugs now, and they use their PGP keys to communicate. And thinking, well, that's great. It's all encrypted, great, quite safe. But but that isn't actually secure. If somebody obtains that key, then everything you've said, all your emails are suddenly exposed unless you've got the effort of deleting them, which very few of them do. So there's a lot of reliance on the technology, thinking that's going to protect us. I think that's a very interesting aspect of it.
So, question?
Is there a lot of use of metadata on the market in Answer and Alphabet? So did the Dutch police have a sort of index of methamphetamine? This is the street price based on 1,000 vendors selling it, and is that metadata started? Was it collected, and is it collected?
Yeah, that's. I don't think so. I think that's interesting because it's not. They haven't gone public with a lot of the information about what they're actually doing with this data or what kind of data they have. So I think that's going to be interesting because there's publicly available documents, and particularly when it comes to prosecution of individuals, they'll be posting rather more of that information as just part of the legal discovery process. But they haven't gone public with that kind of thing, and they don't seem to use it. They don't seem to say, for example, well, this person was selling their meth at a higher quality, for example. We tested that and found out, therefore, it's a much more significant crime. So, but I expect they do collect. They probably do collect data like that because
within the community itself. Within the community itself. Is there an aggregation of metadata?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. No, there's not. I think some people external to it do this sometimes.
They do.
Yeah, but it's not. You don't really have Darknet stats that fine grained, which can be an interesting service to run.
That's what we're thinking.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. Yeah, they do have. There is a site called Grams which looks overall at vendors across markets. It does try and aggregate some data, but it's kind of very basic level of that. So yeah, that'd be one. I certainly could do with some help with coding on that.
Any more questions?
Just the idea of people trusting the security. This is something that's gone on for a long time. The Enigma machine is a good example. But also, you can look much further back than that. Mary Queen Scott sending her messages out from Kenilworth.
Yeah.
She thought these were all secure.
And
Once we got into them, we were able to persuade people to do all sorts of things.
That's right. Yeah.
Because they thought it was entirely safe.
Yeah, that's right. Human faith in technology is our greatest weakness.
Well, that will draw to a close. Thank you very much, Angus.
Thank you very much.
We have a tradition in the branch that we try and give our speakers a bottle of local water.
Oh wow, that's quite awesome. Thank you very much.
Our next talk is at the start of November, first Wednesday in November. Well, it's not a talk, it's a BCS Voices about personal data. We're going to have Bill Buchanan from Edinburgh Napier coming along to facilitate that. It will be a lively evening. Come along if you want. If not, I hope we see you again at another event. Thanks very much.